Imagine a life sustained only by air and sunlight. Breatharianism, the belief we can live without food, has intrigued skeptics for decades. Devotees claim to have unlocked the secret to longevity, free from physical needs. But when followers are taken in by figureheads who don't practice what they preach, promises of enlightenment give way to tales of starvation, mystery, and death. In this almost certainly not companion series, we examine each episode's origins, production process, behind the scenes, personal thoughts, and most likely go off on some tangents in spite of our best efforts. In this episode, we examine Waiting to Inhale, the baffling existence of breatharianism. I'm Layla Lawrence.
And I'm Dan Lauer.
And this is Possibly Not. Breatharianism. Dan, this was a fun one for us to do. I mean, obviously, it was only the second episode that we recorded, but it was a complete departure from the first episode that we did. This was a lot more opinionated, a little bit more sort of cheeky, I think. How did you first hear about breatharians? I suppose you call them breatharians. How did you first hear about breatharians?
I think it was either a GQ or an Esquire article, and I started reading it, and I thought, wait a minute, am I on The Onion?
It does have the air of that, honestly. I had never heard about this. And when I first saw the Substack article that you wrote on it, I almost thought that you had made it up. I'm going to be completely honest with you.
Well, it fit very neatly into my criteria for what I was producing on the Almost Certainly Not Substack, the magazine version of these, which is that it's little known. I have an approach or an angle to it and something to say. And that it is a mixture. My hope for this episode was the first episode is not true crime. It's mystery. And there's a distinction.
Yes.
With a difference there.
Correct.
But I thought it would be interesting to hit them, to give people a unsolved mysteries vibe, and then immediately, because it's sort of in the, I don't know what you would call it, the subheader or the subtitle for the series is history, mystery, crime, and culture. This is cultural commentary. So if people had a slight amount of fatigue with like unsolved mysteries, true crime, etc., I thought that this would be an interesting second episode because it's very transparently bullshit, and also it's a little bit of history, but it's really cultural commentary.
Well, this is something that effectively still exists, correct? This is something people still practice this?
It is, as far as I know. It is of the human population, it's probably not even 1/2 of 1% of people, but it does exist. And again, it's about the approach and the angle for me. It was an excuse to talk about deeply entrenched belief systems that are hard to disentangle yourselves from, even when they're patently absurd, false, and in this case, will kill you. Without question. If you go down this path and don't change your mind and start eating and drinking, you are going to die.
Well, and that's if you adhere to the practices as preached by people like Ellen Grieve and Wiley Brooks.
Which they absolutely do not. But there are people who don't know that they're charlatans, bullshit artists, and scammers who have devoted themselves to this process, and 100% of them who follow through die, because that's what happened. I mean, there's a line, and this is a little bit more cheeky, as you would say in your English-speaking vernacular, that there's an element to this, and I say it early in the episode, and the goal with this was to be, it's funny. I actually had a friend watch it, an early cut with me before it aired, and she laughed at all the right parts. Like, it was funny to her, and she was surprised. And then it was sad when you talk about the deaths,
Oh, of
and
course,
then it was
yeah.
frustrating when you talk about the charlatanism involved in this. But I have a line in there that I think that you delivered brilliantly and smugly, which is what I asked you to do, which is basically living on air and light alone, or what physicians would call needlessly omitting that which is required to not die. Which I think, like, if I wrote a book about breatharianism, that would be the subtitle: needlessly omitting that which is necessary to not die.
Yeah,
that
would be a great one. I mean, I have to say my favorite chapter in this one was modern Western bullshit. I think that was my
I thought that was a nice
favorite.
juxtaposition to ancient, because, ancient Chinese secrets is a catch-all for, like, well, this is beyond our understanding,
Of course,
and you can't really quantify it, and the ancients knew more than we did, which is absolute horseshit compared to our modern knowledge of the way that the world and the universe and everything works. As many gaps as there are in our understanding, the dumbest person alive today understands the way the world works 1,000 times more than Aristotle did, just because of what's out there in common parlance.
Well, yeah, obviously. I mean, we know now that the Earth is flat, so
as brilliant as Galileo or even Sir Isaac Newton were, are you and I, who are not Newton level geniuses, understand the way the world works better than he did.
Of course.
Just because of the way that science has progressed. So I thought it was a fun juxtaposition. Ancient Chinese secret is sort of a catch-all and almost a cliche.
I do think it's a bit of a, but I think the way it is westernized, I think, is the cliche part of it.
Yeah. And so a lot of this is not Chinese based. That's just sort of a catch-all for, like, mystical and cosmic. And so I will admit that I'll cut this. I was about to say sucked my own dick. I patted myself on the back for I patted myself on the back for the juxtaposition in the two chapters between ancient Chinese secrets, which is in quotes. I put it in quotes. And then the follow-up where I get into how this is breatharianism is a complete corruption of Taoist and Hindu practices.
Yeah.
As opposed to a continuation of them. And so, like, part two chapter heading, modern Western bullshit. I don't know another way to say it. That's the only way to say it.
I think that's a great way to say it, honestly. So when you were writing this, I haven't really looked into this anymore since recording this with you. Ellen Grieve and Wiley Brooks, are those the two most notable figures in the breatharian movement? Is that why you focused on them? Or was that just two that you found most interesting?
They are the most prominent, I would say, especially Ellen Grieve, who goes by Jazz Moheen. But I do everything I can. I think it would aggravate her to use her birth name.
Also,
so
we don't know whether it's Grieve or Grev, honestly. We just sort of made a choice, so we might be
it looks like Grieve.
Just offending people anyway.
Find a pronunciation, but she gave herself a fancy guru name, Jazz Moheen. But yes, those are very prominent. They also happen to be the two who have participated in national or international broadcasts. She did
60 Minutes,
she was featured on an episode of 60 Minutes Australia, and he was on other things, but at least very prominently featured on the Tomorrow Show with Tom Snyder. So I focused on them because I would be able to pull examples of just, like, nuclear level bullshit falling out of their mouths. So I thought that but as far as I'm aware, they are the two most prominent figures. I'm sure that there are adherents to this. I'm sure, gurus typically beget gurus. We make mention of a man who goes by many names, but we refer to him as Jin Lang, who was like a sub-guru who used Jasmahin's teachings, and then someone, a follower of his, died. So there are others, but I think that they were the most prominent figures and maybe the most deplorable. So I wanted to call them out by name. My biggest regret is that Wiley Brooks died in 2022 before I could take a shit into his mouth with this episode.
I'm sure he would have been the first one listening to this and finding your contact information to
Almost
discredit
certainly not, but I hope it makes them. I would be thrilled if this. If the Waiting to Inhale episode somehow got 5 or 6 million views because Ellen Grieve is still alive, I would love for her to sue us.
Is she really? I did not know that.
You should, Layla, because it's at the end of the episode.
Is it? I don't actually listen to what I say.
No, the cards I put in.
Oh, no, you're right. I saw that the other day. The cards at the end.
I'm gonna cut that out so you sound like you know what's going on.
I did just message you about it the other day, didn't I? Because it was the first time that I had seen it. I think when I read the episode, I just genuinely thought she was dead.
You did, but you did see it, and then you just said, "Oh, I didn't know she was still alive." I'm gonna get rid of all this stuff. Don't you worry.
It's fine. I listen. I pay attention. It's somewhere.
But anyway, what I think would be great is that if she tried to sue me or us for libel, because then in court she would have to prove that what she says is true.
Let's hope it doesn't get
libel.
to that.
No, I hope that she does. I would love to be in court with her saying, and then the judge would say, like, well, in order to prove libel, you have to say, like, you are allowed to deliberately undermine a person's income and impugn their reputation. If what they're saying is demonstrably false, then it's not libel. So she would it would be on her to prove that she can actually survive without eating and drinking, which we know is not true. So come on, Ellen, let's do it.
Yeah, people get sucked into this though, don't they? I mean, I think that's the thing that is so disturbingly fascinating about breatharianism is that I just don't know any person who could believe that you don't need food and water at the very least, but food and water to live. I don't know. I don't know how people get sucked into this sort of thing. On one hand, I don't know. But then on the other hand, you think about all of these crazy sort of diet culture things, religion things, cult things. People get sucked into things so easily. They just need someone who is, a charismatic person to sort of talk them into it. It just seems like people are so easily swayed into this kind of thing.
Well, people are generally weak-minded and desperate, in my experience, which I say a little snidely and sarcastically. A little.
I think it's just easily swayed. Like they're looking to belong to something, which is something that you touch on, or we touch on in the episode, is that people are looking to belong to something.
Most people don't feel very special. Most people are not that creative and don't put anything out. Most people who fall into any one of these conspiracy theories, especially ones that are demonstrably false, I think that it's all fairly easily explainable by they find something lacking in their personal experience in their community that they're willing to fill with kind of the first thing that comes along. And that sounds... Nobody wants to think of themselves as not being special. And if you're otherwise unremarkable, I think it's going to be easier for you to fall into this, to fall into QAnon, Pizzagate, Flat Earth.
Well, I think
we didn't go to the moon.
I think this is also unique in that it kind of preys on someone's desire to be a healthier or better version of themselves.
But what's interesting is it's not necessarily physical health. This is about spiritual. It's all tied up in spiritual enlightenment, like a path to enlightenment, which we touch on too. Certain subsects of monks, or whatever phraseology you want to use, depending on the dogma that they follow, exist within extreme asceticism. That might mean, some Christian or Catholic monks, they wear those like toga robes and sandals. They don't wear underwear. They have no possessions. They don't get paid.
Yep.
They live on a cot. They eat
I mean, they used
rice.
to, self-flagellate as well. I mean, they used to like torture themselves.
And that was either a way to demonstrate your fealty to God or a god, or to reach some new form of, I mean, Tibetan monks go without. But I think what's interesting is that none of them really claim, or very few of them claim. I mean, there are even Hindu practices where they will, to show their devotion to their particular sect, these yogis will hold one of their hands or arms in the air until it atrophies.
What?
Yeah. And so their their hands collapse, their muscles atrophy, and they maintain. I mean,
That must
basically
take
their
ages.
it does, but their arm becomes basically frozen in that position, which must be incredibly painful. But that's something that they will do as a form of asceticism and almost self-flagellation because it's painful. But that's a way to prove their devotion, which I think is absurd and unnecessary. But they also eat and drink. So it's not, I mean, having the use of both arms is not necessary for survival, unlike food and water. So I think that there's precedent here. And like I said, I think it's a corruption of asceticism, the complete and total removal, and that I don't care how spiritually enlightened you are. I mean, in the episode, we go through exactly what happens to your body when you stop eating and drinking.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, if you're stranded somewhere, you can survive without food for much longer than water.
Oh, of course. But also, I mean, if you don't have water, people have been forced to drink their own urine before. People usually have that drive to survive.
Eating. This is the reason that they use three of the primary ways that you can torture someone. Either just because you're a sadist or for interrogation purposes, deprive them of water, deprive them of food, and deprive them of sleep. The human body's desperation for those three things. Well, that's the exact reason it doesn't work in interrogation, because if you're deprived of those three things, you're going to tell whoever your captor is whatever it is that they want to hear, so you can eat, drink, and sleep.
Yes.
As soon as possible, because the human body will begin to scream for those things.
Well, and that kind of opens a question that I have. I mean, how is it that these people's survival instincts don't kick in? Not to discredit the people who died, because I don't want to speak ill of these people, because it is tragic. It is tragic that they get sucked into these things, and these quote unquote leaders kind of drive them to this. But
I think it's the same mechanism that allows that man that I'm referring to. Like, I'm not guessing. I saw a documentary about this Hindu yogi who did this, and you see his fingers are collapsed. There's no muscle in this arm, and he keeps his arm. I think his arm is frozen that way. But
as humans, we are essentially animals, and I mean, I would imagine it would get to a point where that survival mentality would kick in, and you'd be like, I have to eat something. I have to drink something. Like, how does that not happen for these people?
They spend a lot of time in preparation to override their instinct. It's almost like when they break a horse in, they're override. A horse's instinct is basically to flee from anything unfamiliar, to run away, which is a perfectly rational response to animal. Because I think that you just said that humans are basically animals. We are only animals.
Yeah, we are. We're animals.
We're very, very intelligent apes. That's all we are. But it is possible to break your instinct, which we do culturally actually all the time. I mean, in the old days, if somebody made you the old days, the tribe, or prehistory days, there might be a cultural taboo against murder, but no law. I mean, there was no laws really. It was there was agreed upon things, and so it's sort of like chimpanzees.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need permission. Like, you're not going to go to jail because you murdered another chimpanzee who took your banana.
Of course, yeah.
So we're overriding those, and our cultural evolution and our biological evolution are so out of sync. I mean, we were with just animals without culture, without law 10,000 years ago.
Do you think at some point it becomes like a mind over matter thing?
Absolutely. We do that all the time because, I mean, I personally, the human body craves carbohydrates, craves sugar.
Some more than others.
I don't. Some more than others, but I don't. I mean, as a perfect example, I do both intermittent fasting and a low to no carb diet, and that is me consuming as much water and as many calories as I need to function and omitting certain parts of it. My body craves that, or at least in the beginning it did. It's very difficult for people to do that sort of a diet because it's overriding your instinct to survive utilizing carbohydrates. So I think I have some familiarity with the possibility of doing that.
Do you feel like at this point that has become like part of your personality, like an obsession for you? Like, you would feel if one day you woke up and you went, oh, fuck, I just really want a donut. Would you kind of not do that just to prove a point?
Not to anybody but myself, because I think that here's the way I look at it legitimately, is that I have had weight problems that have been uncomfortable to severe throughout my life. So the way that I look at it, if somebody is an alcoholic, they can't have a beer.
Yes.
They're going to drink all the beer, which is why they don't consume alcohol at all. I feel like because of it getting out of control and me having a lack of ability to restrict, I can indulge myself on, I do enjoy meat and cheese and green vegetables, which is basically the constituent parts of my diet. Plus, because I'm omitting I take fiber supplements and vitamins. But I can eat it kind of as much steak or chicken or whatever as I want to, and consume the perfect amount of calories for my weight, like my body, to have plenty of energy, and I drink tons of water. So it's not really asceticism for me, but I feel sort of like an alcoholic for carbohydrates. I can't eat a potato chip or a small bag of potato chips or half a bag of potato chips, and I can't eat a donut
because I'm
going to eat all the donuts.
12.
I will eat all of the donuts. Yeah. I know that about myself, and because and donuts and potato chips are not good for you. Whereas, like, I think that people think of low carb as much bacon and red meat as you can shove into your face. I eat equal portions of just baked or roasted chicken with a green salad. And so I think that it is, but I can eat like a whole chicken, because actually, like, a whole baked chicken is not that many calories. It's very low fat. It's very lean. And it is satiating. So yes and no, but I think that it's a way that between that, I also exercise every single day.
Do you think in a way, though, that this is an obsession for you at this point? Or is this just a lifestyle?
Well, it's a lifestyle. I mean, what's the difference between an obsession and discipline?
Well, but that could be applied to this breatharianism as well. I mean, obviously, in our brains, it's insane to go without food or water. But I think it could be applied to breatharians that it is an obsession or it is a lifestyle for them.
It is, and I guess it's a distinction with a difference, because I think that there would be, because some people starve themselves and go without food and water not to reach spiritual enlightenment,
yes,
because they want to lose 5 pounds. I am doing it in a way where it works for me. It is incorporated into my lifestyle, and I think that that's actually the best way to think about it. And I think actually some nutritionists will tell you to. It's not a diet. You have to find a balance in lifestyle that works for you. And at this point, I have, through experience, overrided my natural desire to, like, I can be around people who are eating things that I don't eat,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm fortunate in that I can still indulge myself with like a really good steak is just as good to me as a pizza.
Yeah. And you said you practice fasting as well. Obviously, breatharianism is fasting to an insane degree. What's the longest that you've ever fasted?
I do intermittent fasting, so I typically give myself a 4-hour window
Mm-hmm.
to eat my calories for the day. So then it's 20 hours without food. But I will
So
say
it's not
this is
like
that,
days without food.
oh no, intermittent fasting for me is like basically a meal or two a day in a narrow window.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I will say that within that window, I aim for between 1900 and 2100 calories, which is the calories that for a man my size should be taking in. So I'm not depriving myself of calories. I'm limiting the window in which I consume those calories.
In the early days within those fasting windows, did you ever feel any of the sort of early, probably very minor symptoms that you would feel if you were starving yourself?
Very minor. Lethargy, and your stomach isn't used to it, so it's going to growl at you and feel
Mm-hmm.
empty. It still does, but that's just going between eating. I mean, it doesn't feel like suffering to me, and I think that I would, if I was doing the same thing and eating every 3 days, and every 3 days I ate 1,200 calories for a man my size, that would be starving myself.
And there are
And
people
that's
who
actually
do that. Well, not the 1,200 calories, but there are people who very regularly will go without eating for 3 days because the sort of reasoning that I've heard is that when we were cave people back in the day, we would go for days without eating food until the next kill or until, the next meal came. And so they're sort of reverting back to that where they'll go, I think 3 days is like the maximum I've heard of. Maybe I've heard of like 5, but it's not, they're consuming still, I think, clear liquids. So sort of like herbal teas and water and that sort of thing, just no food.
And I think that's actually entirely untrue. I think that by the time we wouldn't have survived as a species with that much deprivation, and I think they're confusing. Like great apes
Mm-hmm.
eat fruit primarily, um, and they eat every single day, and they have to eat a lot. They're talking. I mean, like the kind of animals that do that are like like anacondas will eat a
Yeah.
whole water buffalo, and then, but it's pretty rare that they're going to be able to position themselves to snag a water buffalo. They can survive on that for 3 months
I think they're talking
because of
about
how
like the typical
vast it
depiction
is.
of like cave people. And when you see cave people in cartoons and movies and literature, usually they're eating meat. It's very rare that you'll see them eating like fruits or vegetables. So I
Well, and I
think
think
that's
it was
the
exactly the
distortion.
inverse, is that it's harder. It was hard. I mean, obviously, you don't have to hunt and kill a plant.
Mhm.
So, hunters and gatherers, I think that, yeah, the men would be out hunting. Hopefully, they brought something down. Maybe they didn't. But the women would be foraging all day, too.
Or
I
the
think that they ate
women
every
would be
day.
hunting. Thank you very much.
No, they wouldn't, because they had to breastfeed the children that were there.
I'm sure
So
there were
that's
women
just,
hunters.
I'm not, but fine. Um, this is not a feminism thing. This is a practicality thing. The
Mhm.
women reared the children, and men did the hunting
Uh-huh.
because men
Down with the
are
patriarchy.
taller,
Thank you very much.
stronger, and
How
faster, and
dare
women.
you?
I mean, this is not even up for debate. That's just what I mean, when we were hunter gatherers, that's what happened.
All right.
But that's not the point, because the women contributed as well, because the men might fail,
Mm-hmm.
right? If they failed to bring down
Breast
prey
milk for
and
everyone.
get meat, or breast milk for everyone, or there would be a certain amount of food to intake. I mean, I guess there were female hunters. This isn't the point. I mean, this is applying modern philosophy to hunter gatherers, which is
My point
pointless.
was that I think that these people who are, I mean, I can't even remember the name for it. There's a particular diet where it's like you only eat the way the cave people ate, and I cannot remember. Is it like paleo? Is that what it is? I want to
Well,
say.
probably, but
But I
the
think
thing
it is
is
the
that
fasting for like 3 days or whatever. The basis of that fasting is that our bodies are not used to consuming food every single day or 3 meals a day, because
I believe
in
that's
that
a
time we went
corruption.
3 days without food before the next water buffalo or whatever.
But we just didn't. And what they're actually talking about is feast and famine, and that would be more typical of seasonal.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be every 3 days. Like the winters would be a little leaner.
Yeah.
Crops would die. But the reason that you and I are having this conversation, and that we're having a conversation between countries on wireless internet, and recording into these fancy microphones that are capturing the audio quality, because we made it this far.
Yeah.
And the reason that we made it this far is because they knew that the winter was coming, and so they would spend the summer stockpiling.
Mm-hmm.
But they're right. It would tend to get a little leaner at times, but it wasn't every 3 days. And I'll tell you this, and you might even know in your in your acting profession, women will starve themselves to lose weight very
Oh,
quickly,
100%.
and that does nothing good to your
I mean,
metabolism.
there are
You're
also
going to gain that weight.
other factors like body dysmorphia and that as well. Not to skip over those, but yeah, it's
No,
completely unsustainable.
but no one who knows a lot about this will tell you that it's anything but horrible for your You're going
Oh
to
yeah,
gain that weight back, and it's going to become more difficult to lose it in a healthy way. When I'm
yes.
losing weight, I aim for a pound a week
Mm-hmm.
and no more. Um, which I think is, I mean, yeah, that's kind of the general. If you're losing more than a pound a week, it's too extreme.
Do you think people
Um,
would do breatharianism for that purpose, like for more of a physical wellness rather than a spiritual wellness?
I guess
And that's just
I
kind
mean,
of a
I don't know.
byproduct.
Yeah, you would have to. I mean, I think that would be person to person.
I
You'd have
think
to
that
ask them.
people are so obsessed with how we look, especially in this age of social media. I think it would almost be easier to get people to convert to this, because I think you could definitely go at it. Not that I'm trying to give Ellen Grieve, some pointers or anything, but I think you could go at it from the like physical health perspective, and then sort of the spiritual health is like a byproduct that comes along with it. I mean, I think it
I
could even be easier to peddle this now than it was when it was at its height.
it actually may be, that would be person to person, but I think that the person who would be ensnared by this is probably obsessed with spirituality and some version of health, natural food,
Yeah.
no
Well, that's
process,
every
blah blah blah.
crunchy yoga person. That's I mean, I've been that way as well. I've been very like, oh, I don't want to eat any processed food. I don't want to have any of these I feel like it's easy to develop an obsession over any of these things, because I feel like it is kind of a mind over matter. I think we crave that, the mind over matter, controlling things that you
Well, and I
can
don't think there's
control.
anything wrong with that, because there's a nobility in discipline.
Mm-hmm.
You should deprive yourself. You shouldn't indulge every impulse and every desire. If you did, I mean, if you do, I've done that with drugs. I've done that with alcohol. I've done that with food, and it doesn't. So restricting the amount that you consume of or sex,
Mm-hmm.
anything, there's something to be said for discipline. The distance between discipline and obsession, I think, is a little harder to quantify. My point with the people who would be drawn into this, and the people that I've seen pictures of who have done this, begin in a fairly healthy state, because so I'm not saying that it's impossible that someone would be overweight and use this as like well, I might as well kill two birds with one stone because I want to be at one with the universe, whatever the fuck that means, and also lose weight at the same time. Best of both worlds. But I think that they wouldn't, the person who's just looking to lose weight quickly wouldn't need this as they would just fast for an extreme amount of time and probably wouldn't, because don't forget that these people are not fasting in their minds. They are consuming
light,
and they're consuming
and
light,
prana.
air, and prana.
Yeah. I mean,
So
it is more of a religion in that aspect, isn't it?
it is. It's, well, and a religion or belief or faith is belief in the with the absence of evidence. That's a belief.
Yes.
So yeah, I would say that, I mean, the distance, and also when we want to talk about this is a little heavier, the distance between a religion and a cult.
I
mean, I think
don't
that
think
people
it's
tend to
very
think about it.
vast, that different. I mean,
It's not very
personally, I don't
vast,
think
but
it's very vast.
people tend to think about it about how extreme it is, but religion is belief in the absence of evidence. So how, and people proclaiming to know things that they know they don't actually know. They believe it. So I don't know. I think it would be a person to person thing. And then even then, how much do you rely what the person is telling you?
That's
What's
true.
what's the difference between what they actually believe and what they're saying out loud, which is, I mean, everybody does that. So I don't know. I think that your average person, divorced from the desire to ascend to a new layer of spirituality, would just drink a Diet Coke a day and not need this as cover. But I'm not saying that that's universal. I honestly don't know.
Do you think that this is a sort of bastardization of what breatharianism was meant to be? I mean, I'm not even certain of the origins of breatharianism, but as most religions are, kind of a distortion. I mean, it doesn't matter. One church could say one thing and another church could say another thing. They could read different meanings into the same passage from the Bible. And that's the same religion.
We touch on this.
So
that the asceticism, the belief in chi, the belief in prana, are beliefs in these, the existence of some sort of intangible, unfalsifiable, unverifiable energy or field or something that cannot be quantified that affects our bodies. And again, it's if it exists, it's not supernatural. It's part of nature we haven't quantified yet. But that does originate from Hindu texts, prana and chi, which is a little bit more Buddhist, I believe. That those are aspects of it, but I believe that breatharianism is a exaggeration, a corruption, and an extension of that to presuppose the idea that you can it's not that those things exist, but that's all the constituent parts of survival are made up of that. I don't know that. I will be complete. I try to do my due diligence. I do my research. I have not read the Upanishads or any of those Hindu texts.
How dare you?
Front to back. But I will say that I do not believe that they are encouraging people. I mean, look, Hinduism wouldn't have gotten this far if it was a base precept that you don't eat or drink, because they all would have died before they got a chance to write the books. So I think that this is there was, especially in the 60s and 70s with there was the New Age revival, the hippies, there was this reemergence of interpreting Eastern culture and applying. That's why I called it modern Western bullshit, because they would take, with very little understanding, they would sort of cherry pick the things that made the most sense to them. And frankly, I think people like Wiley Brooks and Ellen Grieve were no different than people like Charles Manson, which is like, I think that not only do I think that I'm charismatic enough to get people to buy my bullshit, but they'll probably pay me for it too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I think as far as, modern Western bullshit goes, I think that's been pervasive in this culture for so long. I mean, you just look at, what was it, like the early, I want to say sometime in the 90s, I think, when feng shui was like such a huge thing in the Western countries, and nobody really understood it. It was just kind of like, hey, don't face your bed this way because of this. It was like such a strange thing that was just
And
really, it was in all the
I
home reno shows and like all this stuff. And it was like, where did this come from?
well, and I think that that's also there were charlatans in ancient China too.
Oh, I'm
Somebody
throughout
started the
history
bullshit.
everywhere. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, somebody started the bullshit. And when you say that the bed should face a certain way, and if you see a frog hop past with 3 legs instead of 4, that's a sign of good fortune. Somebody just made it up at some point
Yeah.
and then wrote it down.
Yeah.
But because it's ancient, I don't know. Some people want to. I mean, I'm not impressed. I'm more impressed by the fact that we made it to the moon or
But
interstates.
did we?
Yes, but I'm more like people are like I mean the pyramids are incredibly impressive, but they're impressive because of the way that the methodology that they would have used to build it at the time. But I think that I mean that was their technology at the time. They used what they had at their disposal, and look what we've achieved.
Mm-hmm.
They had machinery, but they thought of machinery in terms of
Yeah.
manpower, and we think of machinery in terms of machine power. But the things that people are like, oh my God, like the ancients must have known things that we didn't. And I'm like, it's exactly the opposite. You can drive in a car from one side of the country to the other,
Because it's flat.
like never having to go on a dirt road. And I think that covers 3,000 like miles or more. And so a really big triangle in the desert at a time before they had machinery per se or cranes. But the thing is that the ancients had cranes too. They had cantilevered cranes and counterweighted cranes, and they
Yes.
could lift ships. And so, like, they were using machinery, just not the way that we think about it. It wasn't electric or it wasn't hydraulic powered.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's something alluring to people about lost technology. I don't think it's lost. I
I
think we just have a better way to do
I
it.
think the alluring thing is not necessarily lost technology. I think there's always an allure to the way that things used to be. I think
Well,
that
and
as people get older, they just always want to reference the good old days, the way things used to be. And I think that's just kind of a more broad ideology there where you talk about like, oh, the ancients knew more and the ancients knew that. I think that's just kind of a more broad spectrum of in the good old days, like that kind of thing.
it's just bizarre to me that the ancients knew much, much less than we do, and that's why they made up stories to account for why things
Yeah,
happened.
yes, but people don't think that those stories are made up, do they?
Well, they're not very bright. I don't have a nicer way to say it.
That's where you get into that though. It's the question of what is made up and what is not made up, the explanations of these
It's made up.
things,
The
and
idea that that a bed facing a certain direction or the 3-legged frog is lucky is made up. I'm not guessing. I'm not imagining. That was a way to explain, to give some order to chaos.
mm-hmm.
We still live in a chaotic world where we don't know as much as we wish we did. And even if we do, the smartest physicist and mathematician on the planet couldn't explain to me in a way that I or you or anybody else who's not the smartest physicist on the planet couldn't explain concepts that make sense to them that can't our brains just don't function on that level.
Well,
And
do you think that
we
kind
think
of
in terms of debt. We live for maybe 100 years. We're not really capable of conceptualizing a billion years.
of
Our
course.
time scale is in decades. That's our whole our whole experience is in a span of maybe 10 decades, maybe 11
Mm-hmm.
if you really live a long time. So what we're capable, and that's understanding the scale of the universe in which we live better than the knowledge. There's more knowledge available than at any point in human history right now, and the quality of life is better than at any point in human history. It used to be so much more brutal. And so the filling the gap with things that you didn't understand by superstition or finding the reason that they had would make sacrifices to the sun god, because they didn't at first they didn't know why the eclipse was happening. The gods must be angry.
Do you think that kind of leads into these conspiracy theories like the flat earth theory, which we touched on in this episode, where it's like trying to bring order to chaos, trying to understand something that is sometimes
No.
unfathomable by the human brain?
No, because I don't think a sphere is unfathomable.
You don't think a sphere floating in a solar system and a galaxy and a universe full of billions of those things is unfathomable? I think it is to a point. Like, I don't understand
No,
how it
because
works.
but what but there are people who do, and I mean, we know that that's the case. I mean, the ancients um used very basic geometry and math based on angles of the sun with known sizes of objects to calculate the circumference of if you calculate, they were attempting to calculate the circumference of the planet Earth in like 2000 BC. In order to calculate the circumference of something, you have to know it's round.
Mm-hmm.
And if shadows cast from similar sized objects are at different sizes at the same time of day, that's only happens on a curved plane and not a flat plane.
Well, and I am not
So
refuting this at all. Please let it be known that I do not believe the Earth is flat. I just want to
I don't think
say
it's
that. Just
unfathomable.
want to say that to
I
begin
think
with.
that those people it's not unfathomable to them. It becomes part of their identity and it makes them feel special where that's otherwise lacking. Just like
Is
I
that
said in the
why? I was going to
episode.
say, is that why you kind of linked that? Because there are several conspiracy theories that I feel that you could link to breatharianism, conspiracy theories or cults or religions or anything like that you could link to breatharianism, but you chose to include the flat earthers as they call themselves. So why did
Well,
you choose to include that?
because I think it's as demonstrable that the earth is round as it is that if you go without food and water for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or depending on how much fat stores you have, give it 45 to 70 days,
Mm-hmm.
you are going to die in the same way that since time immemorial, we have known, we as a species have known that the earth is round. Do we know exactly how big it is? Did we know that the earth went around the sun and not the other way around? I mean, Galileo paid the price for that by trying to prove that. The heliocentric model um, was actually forbidden by the Catholic Church. So
Lots of things are
our
forbidden by the
understanding
Catholic
is
Church.
but our understanding of those things as fundamental, because I mean, in the dogma at the time, the thing that made most, because God created man and the earth, so it would be the center of the entire universe. What's interesting about that, though, is because if the universe is infinite, everywhere in the universe is the center. Wherever you happen to be is at the center of the universe.
Agreed.
Um, but is the universe infinite? I don't know, but I don't get uncomfortable by that because we probably will know one day. We're learning more all the time. I don't think it's the same thing. I think that I can't say, and again, it's sort of like, is it spirituality or losing weight? I would be curious to the people who spearhead QAnon, flat Earth, take your pick. If you could give them sodium pentothal and put them on a polygraph,
Mm-hmm.
to what extent did they actually believe it, and to what extent are they selling something?
Or to what extent
That,
are they just trying to belong?
and that's person to person,
Of course,
right?
yeah.
But I'm most suspicious of people who write books and sell videos and profit from it, and I tend to believe that those are the non-true believers and charlatans. I don't think that your average person who believes that the earth is flat and doesn't make any money from it, that's not a charlatan.
Mm-hmm.
That's a misguided person. A charlatan is something who knows what they're saying is bullshit and doesn't follow their own rules and sells it to people as if they do, like Ellen Grieve
Yeah,
and
well,
Wiley
that's why I
Brooks.
said,
They
I mean, I
eat
don't want to
food.
disrespect the people who have died following this bizarre practice. I don't want to,
And I think that you
because
would need,
I feel like they are misguided, certainly.
I think they themselves, anyone who believes something that's demonstrably untrue, that's between them and their psychologist to figure out exactly why they need to fill the, you know what I mean? Like they would need to do a lot of work to find out why they're so gullible and find this so entrenched. But we touch on this too, that it's pointless to argue with a delusion.
Oh my gosh,
Because
yes, absolutely. Well, that's the
you
whole thing,
cannot,
especially with social media the way it is now. It's just everybody has an opinion and they are just more than willing to give it to you.
and you know, I forgive me, but it's a cliche because I like this cliche, is that opinions are like assholes. Everyone has one and they all stink.
It's very true.
So yeah, so I mean, I don't know. And there's no point in arguing because it'll eventually get to the point where like, well, have you been to space and seen that the Earth is round? I'm like, well, you know I haven't.
Yeah.
You know I haven't. But every experiment that you claim to perform to prove that, I have a clip in the show of someone doing an experiment with light, like actually performing science, saying if the Earth is flat, it should work this way. I don't have subtitles and I don't have the audio, but what you're seeing in that clip is somebody failing. Because what they're saying is if the Earth is flat, accounting for topography, they found a really flat plane and water levels and all of that. We're going to have two walls we're going to cut a hole in and have a certain amount of distance. My camera is going to be set at 17 feet and you're going to lift a light at 17 feet and that you should see the light in the camera through the hole at this certain height if the Earth is flat. And in the video, the guy measures it and puts the light up and says, we can't see the light, raise your light a little higher. And he does, to the point that you would need to account for a round Earth. Right, so they actually they prove that the Earth, I mean, it's a small experiment, but and the guy's response, who's running the experiment, is, oh, interesting. And then instead of saying, oh, okay, well, that's really good evidence that the Earth is round, started trying to figure out what was wrong with the experiment.
Well, that's like saying that you know, when you're on 60 Minutes trying to prove that breatharianism is sustainable, saying that the energy of the city is not allowing you to absorb prana. It's there's always a reason for it, isn't there?
And you cannot. Things need to be falsifiable, and you can't prove a negative.
Well, on that note, are there any conspiracy theories that you even a little bit buy into? And what makes a conspiracy theory, really? I suppose that's just like something that goes against what is normally accepted to be true. But is there a conspiracy theory in history across cultures that you buy into, like even just a little bit?
I wonder to what extent Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone actor. I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated Kennedy. I think there's enough information to make me curious from an academic perspective if he was influenced. What is it? I think people get lost in what a conspiracy is. They think of this grand arch organization. In the legal definition of a conspiracy is two people planning. If I say to you, "Hey, Layla, let's rob a bank," and you say, "Okay,
we are conspiring.
We're in a conspiracy."
Yes.
Yeah. That's a legal conspiracy. So it's really just two people planning. So I think yes, and a conspiracy theory has a negative connotation, but a conspiracy happens all the time. I think one of the most fascinating ones to me is the 9/11 truthers, because they're like, well, it was a conspiracy. And you know what it was? Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, it was. You're correct. Yeah.
Conspired. It was more than one person who planned for years to carry out that attack. there's already a conspiracy that we know happened. I don't know why that's not good enough for people.
Well, I
there has
think
to be another layer
that
of
term
conspiracy
theory, I think, has been kind of like,
it's pejorative now.
Yeah, it doesn't mean what it means. It's become more of like a question everything. That's not true. Like it doesn't mean what it definitively means, I suppose.
And my thing with the 9/11 truthers and flat earthers and we didn't go to the moon, why is Einstein famous?
His hair.
Other than that,
why is Einstein famous? Theory of relativity, right? I mean, is that why he's famous? I don't know. I actually don't know why Einstein's famous. He was very smart.
Both of his theories of relativity, he rewrote Newton's understanding of physics. But my point is that he's not famous because he towed the line and said, Newton is right and I have nothing to add.
He questioned it.
And proved it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're continuing to refine his ideas.
So he is a conspiracy theorist.
No, he's an innovator. But my point is not about conspiracies at this moment. My point is about scientists cannot wait to prove something new, that's all they do.
Mm-hmm.
So if there was, do you any idea how a person who could definitively prove the Earth was flat, we didn't go to the moon, or that 9/11 was actually a controlled demolition?
Oh, it would be
wild.
Be in
history books.
Yeah.
And so if any science is like, it's not a cabal. They don't all meet. And the way that you get famous as an archaeologist or a sociologist or a physicist or a mathematician is to go to new ground and to say, that thing that we thought all this time, that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And here's my proof. And then that's where the falsifiability comes in, because you publish your evidence and then in like peer-reviewed journals, and every other scientist attacks it from every direction they can to try to falsify it. And that's what they did with the general and special theories of relativity. And they couldn't. And then it became scientific fact. The hypothesis became fact. And I think I'm not a physicist and I'm not experienced enough in physics, but I understand that most of Einstein's special and general relativity still stand. And he even corrected himself. I believe he began his first paper was the theory of general relativity, which is the relative motion of, the perspective of motion or relative motion between bodies and how that's perceived in time and space, the space-time continuum and the warping of space and why that occurs. And then he rewrote himself because he found new data.
I mean, that's to an extent, that's the responsibility of a scientist, isn't it? To question everything, even themselves. That's what
science does. So people have their biases, but scientists who adhere to the scientific... there's not a person who graduates, who has their doctorate in any scientific field. They want to prove something that's never been proven before.
Oh, yeah,
they would be famous forever.
Mm-hmm.
Forever. So, I think that...
You think that's why all of these kind of lay in theory rather in being proven?
Yes. And I think that there would be... And there are credible scientists who are trying to prove things. Like there is an archaeologist who has some doubts about the timing of the building of the pyramid versus the Sphinx and when did that occur, and there's water erosion. He's not sure, but he's looking into it.
Mm-hmm.
But that takes years of dedicated
if not lifetimes,
research and papers and peer-reviewed journals and falsifiability. And so you really just need to get a scientist on your side. I'm not saying that I don't know. The best evidence that is available says that the Earth is round and that we've known it for a very long time. The best evidence that's available is that we went to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And the best evidence that's available, let me take that again. The best evidence that's available is if you don't eat or drink for 45 days, you are going to fucking die. So until that's proven wrong, eat something. It's good for you.
I'm Layla Lawrence.
And I'm Dan Lauer.
And this has been Possibly Not.